What would happen if I told you that Hamilton's controversial decision in Azerbaijan was not an accident, but a silent declaration of war inside Ferrari? Was it rebellion or strategy? Everything was triggered in Tour 43 of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix 2025. Ferrari, once more immersed in the complex balance between sports strategy and internal policy, made a decision that seemed logical in the paper, but that would end up revealing deep cracks in the structure of the team. At that point in the race, Charles Leclerc marched ahead of his partner Lewis Hamilton, but with visibly degraded hard tires. Hamilton, in contrast, had been footwear with a new middle tire game, faster and better. From the Ferrari wall, the decision was clear. Ask Leclerc to give up his position for Hamilton to try to hunt a group of pilots who were a few seconds later. The strategy theoretically made sense. In that car train ahead were Lando Norris, Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson, all with rhythm and potential to be reached if Hamilton could maximize his compound. If the British managed to advance any of them, Ferrari could extract more points of the weekend. The team had opted for a play that depended not only on Hamilton's speed, but also on blind compliance by both pilots. The first step worked. Leclerc complied with the order, sacrificing its position in favor of the 7-time world champion. But the second act, the return of the position if the objective was not achieved, became the true trigger for the conflict. Hamilton, despite having better tires, failed to specify any significant advance. The strategic window closed quickly, and in the last laps, the situation was stagnant. It was then that Ferrari decided to execute the final part of the plan: order Hamilton to return the position to Leclerc. However, that order was late and in an extremely complex context. The moment chosen for communication was in the middle of the main line, with Hamilton and more than 340 km/h, at a point where any slowdown or line change maneuver could involve unnecessary risks. Beyond physical risk, the message was impregnated with a political burden. This was not a simple contempt of a team order. It was a declaration of principles. It was a deliberate play of a pilot who not only runs to gain races, but also to claim his space and his influence on a structure that still wobbles between respecting his legacy and the need to establish clear hierarchies. Hamilton, when ignoring the instruction, not only prioritized his perception of sports justice, but also put an implicit warning on the table. If Ferrari wants to lead him, he must do it with intelligence, coherence, and above all, with respect. Because not all pilots accept orders without conditions. Some, like Lewis Hamilton, decide when to obey and when to mark territory. The official broadcasts of the Azerbaijan 2025 Grand Prix did not show the whole truth. While the world saw the last turns of the race from the cameras of the FOM, which really happened within the internal communication channel of Ferrari was another story. A much more loaded story of tension, calculations, and double-edged messages. The radio orders that were issued publicly showed a team trying late to recover the agreed order. But in private channels, the tone was completely different. What was transmitted between engineers and pilots had nuances of political pressure, implicit hierarchy, and a silent struggle to establish control. Riccardo Adami, Hamilton's track engineer, was the one who gave the order. But it was not any instruction. The way he expressed himself was meticulously measured. Let Charles forward you. It's 2.5 behind you. It's the last round. There was no urgency. There were no emotional appeals. Only a cold, surgical message, with a structure more typical of a warning than of a request. For many analysts, that tone reflects somewhat deeper. A lack of total alignment between the key figures of the team. At a time when an order should have been given firmly and authority, what was heard was a voice that seemed to comply with a protocol rather than command a real strategic decision. What was not seen on television was Hamilton's behavior once the order was received. From the outside, it would seem to ignore. But what telemetrias and cameras on board show is that Hamilton decelerated in a controlled way, even slightly came out of the ideal race line, as if he were leaving the door open, although not quite. It was an ambiguous but deliberate play. He did not lift completely, he did not reduce the march to the point of allowing easy overtaking. He did just to say that he considered the order, without carrying it out. That fine line between tactical obedience and veiled challenge was executed with surgical precision. And it is that same ambiguity that feeds the narrative that Hamilton did not completely disobey, but that he played the same political game they proposed. The most revealing of all this is that the order itself did not have a real sporting weight. The difference between P8 and P9 is irrelevant in the context of the championship. But that is precisely what makes the moment so significant. Because if it was not for the points, then why Ferrari insisted on reverse the position? And if it wasn't for points, why did Hamilton refuse? The answer points to something much deeper than a simple career strategy. It was a message, a silent dispute on who has the last word within the team, a sample of power. And in that type of struggles, every gesture, every silence, every second counts. What did not show on television was Ferrari's true theater of operations. It was not a simple difference in rhythm or a bad execution. It was a carefully choreographed scene by both pilots, where each played their role. Leclerc as the loyal that expects internal justice, Hamilton as the veteran who demands respect before blind obedience. The track showed a race, but the radio revealed a cold war. And the most worrying thing for Ferrari is that this war has just begun. At this point of the analysis, it is no longer about understanding an isolated action on track, but about crumbling its consequences from a tactical, symbolic, and political perspective. Because what happened in Baku between Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and Ferrari cannot be measured only in seconds or positions. The key to understanding the magnitude of the conflict is to analyze what he won and what each of the parties involved lost, and how that little scene on the main line defines something much bigger. The balance of power within the most emblematic structure of Formula One. Let's start with Lewis Hamilton. From the sports point of view, retaining the 8th place did not represent any substantial advantage. It was not a battle for the podium or a critical point in the fight for the championship. But what was at stake was internal positioning. With a gesture as calculated as letting the meters pass enough without allowing overtaking, Hamilton made it clear that their decisions are not subject to automatisms. Demanded respect. Imposed conditions. It was positioned not as an employee of the team, but as a figure with its own criteria and hierarchy. This demonstration of independence gives him authority, not only in front of Leclerc, but also in front of the engineers Wall and Ferrari sports management. And that authority, in a team that has historically been prone to internal chaos, can be decisive to mold the rest of the season. Ferrari, on the other hand, was in an awkward situation. The team tried to play a structural control letter, but ended up showing weakness. The order was not executed. And the most serious, there were no visible consequences. In Formula One, when a team issues an instruction and this is not fulfilled, and there is also no clear institutional response, the message that is transmitted in and out is dangerous. In the paddock, the rivals read those cracks as symptoms of internal fracture. And for the engineers themselves and mechanics of the team, such episodes deteriorates operational cohesion. Who really sense? Are technical decisions respect or depend on the consent of the pilots? These questions begin to float in the environment, and Ferrari cannot afford to look like a divided team when they are trying to build a winning project with two world-size figures. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, was in an even more fragile position. By accepting to give up his place with the hope that they would return it, he showed obedience, but also dependence on the system. And when that system failed to protect its strategic sacrifice, its political capital eroded. In Maranello, where internal policy has collapsed promising careers, perception matters as much as track performance. Leclerc not only lost a position, he lost an opportunity to demonstrate strength within the team. And the most worrying thing is that these types of defeats are not reflected in timesheets, but leave deep traces in the dynamics among teammates. This episode also exposes Ferrari's urgent need to establish a clear leadership line. In recent years, the team has oscillated between reactive decisions, strategic errors, and a soft management of internal conflicts. Now, with Hamilton on the team, that model is no longer sustainable. Lewis is not a pilot who works well under confusing or empty structures of power. He needs a clear frame, defined roles, and an ambitious plan. If Ferrari does not offer that, what was lived in Azerbaijan will be just the beginning of a chain of strategic clashes. Hamilton's refusal to return the position to Leclerc, beyond the technical execution or the moment in which the order was given, reflects a fracture that already existed. He did not create it. The team did not cause it. But it was he who decided to leave it in evidence, perhaps because he felt it was no longer possible to continue sustaining a system that requested obedience without justification. And that decision, although discreet in shape, was overwhelming in the background. There were no furious radios, there were no intentional blockages or exaggerated gestures. Only a career line maintained, a car that went ahead. And behind, another who couldn't or didn't want to pass it. Lewis Hamilton has marked territory. Charles Leclerc has shown that he is willing to follow the rules, but demands reciprocity. Ferrari has remained, for the moment, in the midst of a crossfire that will only grow if he does not act with decision. And meanwhile, the rest of the paddock observes.